In the weeks leading up to this Deontay Wilder-Tyson Fury rematch, we've seen countless journalists, pundits, managers, promoters, trainers, and even fighters on camera giving interviews. And unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of them have been talking absolute rubbish. They've either been completely smitten by hype and or been displaying outrageous bias and pushing a blatant agenda. But one of the few people who hasn't been doing that is this man right here, veteran journalist Steve Kim. Now remember, he works for ESPN, the same network which Tyson Fury is signed to, the same network which Bob Arum promotes on. But yet he gives a very fair and unbiased assessment of the current heavyweight title picture, which is very refreshing and very surprising coming from an American boxing journalist. He also gives a fantastic detailed breakdown of the Wilder-Fury rematch with regards to tactics, the strengths and weaknesses of both fighters, strategies, etc. He shows a good understanding of the sport. There are very few interviews in the lead up to this Wilder-Fury rematch which are actually worth watching, but two of them which definitely are worth watching are these interviews with Steve Kim. One of them on Boxing Social and the other one on IFL TV. Highly recommended. So I'm going to give you some quotes from these interviews. Now, Steve Kim was originally picking Deontay Wilder to win this rematch, but the closer we get to the fight, the more unsure he is about his original prediction. And this first quote is in relation to that. So it goes as follows. A couple things scare me though. Number one, the groupthink. Even though Tyson is the boxer and the cliche goes, in a rematch you always go with the boxer, for some reason that hasn't applied here. Most of the pundits are picking Deontay Wilder for some reason. Are we becoming prisoners of the moment? Because we have to be honest about this. I was in this very same building a couple months ago and Luis Ortiz was 2 seconds away from being 6 rounds to 1 up. So now I'm thinking about this whole thing. Remember, there's that old cliche. In rematches, it is always the boxer that has the ability to make more adjustments and to be better. It scares me that all of us are kind of going to the other direction. That right there gives me a lot of concern. Right, so that's the first quote from Steve Kim. Couple things to pick up on here. He talks about groupthink. Now, groupthink is basically another term for the hive mind, the herd mentality. You know, like a herd of cattle or a flock of sheep, where one of them goes in one direction and gradually all of them follow and they just go in the same direction because they don't want to be the odd one out. That's what tends to happen with human beings as well. They're sheep-like in the way they think. And so when you have a fighter who is getting a tremendous amount of hype, this herd mentality, this groupthink can take over very quickly. And I've seen it over the decades in boxing, particularly when you're dealing with a knockout artist. And before you know it, everybody is so caught up in the hype of the fighter because he's knocking people out that they overlook a lot of the glaring weaknesses that he's displayed even in his victories. That is what Steve Kim is alluding to with that first quote I gave you. Are we getting caught up in the Deontay Wilder hype? That's basically what he's asking. So a very, very good question and definitely something that people should be contemplating. Now, this next quote is in relation to the first fight and people's perceptions of what took place in the ring, because perception and reality are often two very different things. So the quote goes as follows. In a lot of the rounds in which Wilder came up a little bit short, and I thought it was a perception that he was not the busier guy, is because Fury won a lot of rounds, in our view, not the judges, because when nothing is happening in a round and neither guy is really getting hit, I have to be honest, I don't think 10 punches on average were landed by either fighter. So this became a very tactical fight. It becomes a contest of who is controlling the ring and what is ring generalship. That becomes a matter of opinion. who looks like they're in control. So when nothing is happening and the pace is very slow, the guy that looks a little bit more graceful and in control and not missing punches and spinning like a top, that's Tyson Fury. All right, so that's the quote there. Now, again, he's talking about the fact that there wasn't much to split Wilder and Fury in most of the rounds in the first fight by way of punches landed. So at that point, rounds become very open to interpretation. Whose work did you like better? Who do you think landed the more effective punches? If they're both landing a similar amount, and remember, judges are not counting the punches. They're just getting an overall impression of how they feel the round went. They're not sitting there with a pen and paper. Okay, he landed one, he landed. They're not doing that. That's what CompuBox do. Okay? The reality is, most of the rounds in the first fight were very close in terms of punches landed. So after that, it comes down to your perception of who do you think the ring general is. Some may have preferred what Fury was doing with the showboating and making Wilder miss. Others may have seen that as Fury's trying to steal the round and actually Wilder's the one being the aggressor, so he's the ring general. Do you understand? That's where it's open to interpretation. This is why I can't agree with all these people saying the fight was a robbery. It wasn't a robbery. How could it possibly be a robbery when there was so little between them in most rounds by way of punches landed? And Tyson Fury went down twice. I'll certainly say that I felt that Tyson Fury won more rounds overall, definitely. But with the 2 knockdowns, I think a draw was very fair. And Steve Kim is alluding to that in that particular quote by, pointing out the fact that a lot of it comes down to perception. Who you perceive the ring general to be, because there was not much to split them in terms of punches landed. Ultimately, we want one guy to be clearly landing more punches than the other guy. Not a situation where you have to go back and analyze every single round in slow motion to find out who landed one more punch than the other. No, that's no good. It needs to be clear who's landing more than the other guy in order for you to call a fight a robbery. Yeah? Anyway, moving on to the next quote from Steve Kim here. And this is in relation to how Deontay Wilder should approach the rematch. So it goes as follows. I asked Deontay Wilder a couple months ago at the beginning of January, for this fight, do you need to jab more? Just by Fury beating him to the jab, by throwing it more often in the first fight, he basically offset Wilder. Now, never mind that most of those jabs didn't land, it gave the impression to me that Fury was winning the rounds. But if you really examine that fight, Fury wasn't landing that many punches, but you get the sense that he had control. So in my view, and I asked this of Deontay, and he did agree with me, he probably needs to go out from the very beginning and be more active with that straight left jab. At least give the impression that, hey, he's working right alongside Tyson Fury. So there you go. That's the next quote. And he's talking about, he thinks Deontay needs to use his jab more, which is something I've been saying. Ever since the rematch was announced, I've been saying Wilder needs to jab with Fury. You can't hook with a hooker, but you can jab with a jabber. I remember when Ray Mercer, and Mercer was more of a brawler than a boxer, when he fought Lennox Lewis, who had a great jab. Ray Mercer couldn't match Lewis for overall boxing skill, but the one thing he did match Lennox Lewis with was his jab. And he landed a hell of a lot of jabs in that fight against Lewis. And his jab was really his best weapon. In the slow rounds and at lulls in the action when not much was going on, Ray Mercer was pumping that jab out. You can jab with a jabber. And Deontay Wilder, I think, needs to trust the process, stick to that jab. In the slow rounds, just pump the jab out. Don't worry about looking for knockout shots. The knockout shot will present itself. The opportunity to land it, rather, will present itself if you just stick to the jab. And that's something Steve Kim is also saying, and he apparently suggested it to Deontay Wilder a while ago. He also pointed out that most of the jabs that Tyson Fury threw in the first fight weren't even landing. And that's another thing which is absolutely true. If you go look at the footage of the fight, slow it down if you need to. Most of Fury's jabs weren't even landing. They were hitting Wilder's gloves and many of them were falling short. So again, it's about perception. At the time, people are seeing Fury's hands moving and they're thinking, oh, all these punches are landing. Actually, they're not. If you look closely, Fury wasn't landing many punches in the fight and neither was Wilder. It was a very low scoring fight, which is why both of them, after 12 rounds, were relatively fresh-faced. Because, and remember, Deontay Wilder is a tremendous puncher. So if he was landing loads of shots, Fury wouldn't look as fresh as he is. I mean, you compare Vladimir Klitschko's face to Deontay Wilder's face at the end of 12 rounds with Tyson Fury. Vladimir Klitschko looked way more busted up than Deontay Wilder. So I'm telling you people, just like Steve Kim said there, Fury wasn't landing that many punches against Wilder in the first fight. Neither of them were landing that many. It was a low-scoring fight, truth be told, which is why, as I say, a draw was a fair result as far as I'm concerned. If you would have given it a round or two for Fury or a round or two for Wilder, I wouldn't have complained. All right, this next quote is with regards to Tyson Fury's tactics in the rematch and some of the things he needs to do and some of the things he needs to watch out for. So it goes as follows. Tyson is going to try to be more aggressive in spots. There's one thing that I've noticed about Deontay that he does technically where I think Tyson had a big advantage and he'll probably try to take advantage of it more if it arises again. When Deontay Wilder puts both of his hands up above his eye level, goes into that earmuff defense, it's really the one time that Deontay is not dangerous with the right hand. That is a pathway for Tyson to get really offensive. I looked at that first fight and I went, oh man, Fury is playing with fire a lot, but he's slick, which is fine. But at the highest levels of boxing, if you box a near perfect fight, you're still going to get hit. All right, so in that particular quote, he's talking about Tyson Fury being more aggressive in spots. Now, I agree that Fury can do that. He still needs to be very careful, even when he's just being aggressive in spots. He can do that. He can be more aggressive in spots and be successful with it, try and inflict more damage during his attacks. But what I think would be foolish for Tyson Fury is to just walk Wilder down from early on in the fight and just make that his game plan for as long as the fight lasts, to just go forward and walk Wilder down. I think that would be very foolish. If you're talking about Tyson Fury boxing, moving, but then when he sees an opportunity to go in, plant his feet and land some heavy shots, and if he doesn't hurt Wilder, get back out again, that's fine. No problem at all with that. That's called raiding tactics. And obviously, if he does hurt Wilder in one of those raids, then he can stay engaged and maybe take him out or drop him or whatever the case may be. That's still risky because Deontay Wilder is like a wounded animal. If you manage to rock him, as soon as he gets his senses about him, he's going to start throwing some very, very serious punches back at you. And again, when you're dealing with elite level boxing, the margins of error are so small. They're so finite. If you stand in one place for a fraction of a second too long, your lights could go out from a Deontay Wilder right hand. So you need to be very careful, even if you're using raiding tactics against Deontay Wilder. I think pressure tactics, if that's your plan for the full 12 rounds, terrible idea. But if you're talking about the occasional raid where you jump in and throw some real hard shots, that's cool, but still be careful. This next quote is in relation to Tyson Fury's last fight against Otto Wallin, and also a fight against Steve Cunningham that he had many, many moons ago. And Steve Kim points out that small heavyweights, relatively small, with quick feet, etc., have given Tyson Fury issues in the past. And this is another thing that I've pointed out. I want to see Tyson Fury in there against a mover again. Someone like an Usyk, someone like a Michael Hunter, because the last time he was in there with somebody like that, he had a lot of trouble, and that was Steve Cunningham. Now, Steve Kim mentions Otto Wallin next to Steve Cunningham, as in he's a relatively small heavyweight, and his lack of size, maybe his quick foot speed, gave Fury issues. But I don't think Otto Wallin is as quick as a Steve Cunningham or a Michael Hunter or an Alexander Usyk. It's really those guys I'd like to see Fury in with. But I certainly agree with him on the point that smaller heavyweights in the past have given Fury issues. So let me give you the quote now anyway. He goes as follows. The two times when Tyson Fury tactically had some real issues in terms of athleticism were against relatively small guys. Steve Cunningham, who knocked him down early in New York back in 2013, and Otto Wallin. And Otto did say to me, Steve, my lack of size compared to Fury and the fact that I have fast feet and I was able to change my launch point really did affect Tyson Fury. So there you go. That's the quote. The next quote here is a very short one, and it's in relation to Tyson Fury changing trainers. And Steve Kim in the interview basically says that he believes the fighters make the trainer, not the other way around. That it doesn't matter how good a trainer you are, if your fighter just doesn't have the talent, you're not going to be able to turn water into wine. And in fact, I've just given you the quote without saying it. So let me give you the quote directly. He said, none of these guys, as in trainers, no matter how smart they are, they can't turn water into wine. So that's the quote. And he's not saying that Tyson Fury is water, but I guess the point he's making is it shouldn't really make much difference changing trainer. Like if you're a good fighter, you're a good fighter. You know, it shouldn't deteriorate your performances so drastically if you change trainers. I think times when it can is if you have a trainer who has a particular personality where he knows how to push your buttons and get the best out of you from that perspective. Maybe you're someone who's difficult to train and there's only certain guys who are able to work with you because they know how to control you, for lack of a better word. So in them situations, maybe, but then again, I've always said a truly great fighter is not going to forget everything he's learned from previous trainers. He's going to add it to his arsenal. You know, the guys who seem to fall apart when they part ways with a particular trainer, in my view, they were never really that great. So anyway, moving on to the next quote. Now, this one is actually a question from Rob Tebbett, who did the interview on Boxing Social. And he's talking about the fight, Fury versus Wilder, the rematch, and how significant it is historically. So let me quote Rob Tebbett right here. He says, where would this compare to someone you've mentioned, obviously Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield? We've seen Lennox Lewis versus Mike Tyson. Where would you rank this among the big heavyweight fights of the last 20, 25 years? Tyson Fury's been talking about the biggest fight since Ali Frazier. And Steve Kim responds by saying, I wouldn't go that far. He says a little bit more than that, but essentially he's just saying we need to pump the brakes on making out as though this is the biggest fight since Ali Frazier. That's just hype talk from Tyson Fury. And there has been an insane amount of hype talk surrounding this fight. People going way overboard. And to do with Deontay Wilder specifically, the amount of hype, way overboard hype, that people have been carrying on with relation to him is insane and absurd at this point. Deontay Wilder's a good fighter. I've always said he's a good fighter. I was making videos about Deontay Wilder when most of these Wilder fanboys didn't even know who he was. I was actually defending Deontay Wilder for years. Right up until he fought Luis Ortiz, I was defending the guy because the majority of boxing fans were saying Wilder was trash. And I was saying, no, actually, he's really good. Yes, he's ungainly and he's unorthodox and clumsy, but he has a skill at landing that right hand. He's got a better chin than people give him credit for. He's got a tremendous amount of self-belief. I think people are underrating and underestimating Deontay Wilder. That's what I was saying for years on my channel. Facts. But now it's gone to the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Now people have gone from trashing Wilder to saying that he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. So of course I have to do my balancing act again. I have to come in and be a counterweight to the ridiculous over-the-top hype and propaganda about Deontay Wilder being this amazing fighter. Yeah, he's a good fighter, but don't go overboard. You know? And the hype around this fight in terms of its historical significance is way overboard as well. Max Kellerman also kind of alluded to that. It's overboard. People need to pump the brakes on that. You're talking about Wilder and Fury, who don't have Hall of Fame resumes right now. Again, Wilder and his team and his fanboys have been saying that he does. But anybody with a modicum of objectivity and boxing knowledge will know that that's just absolute nonsense. Okay, this next quote is also from Rob Tebbett. He asks a question. So let me just go straight into it. Rob Tebbett says, does the winner of Wilder Fury 2 become the #1 heavyweight in the world, in your opinion? And Steve Kim gives the following answer. He says, I'm not sure about that. It's funny. I'm the only guy giving Anthony Joshua any credit. I don't understand this bias against Anthony Joshua. He had a horrific night in early June, but let's be factual about this one. One guy is the WBC champion in Wilder. Fury is the lineal champion for whatever that means. He did take 2 years off. You could argue that that lineage died, which I wouldn't argue with. But the only heavyweight that has engaged currently in unification bouts and actually consolidated 3/4 of the division is Anthony Joshua. So it's interesting that Anthony Joshua seems to have a lot of detractors. I think he's great for the sport. If you asked most people nowadays, is Lennox Lewis an all-time great heavyweight? Is he one of the top dozen? They would say yes. And I would agree. But I would also say, okay, so if you're going to forgive Lewis for losses to Hasim Rahman and Oliver McCall, why are we not going to forgive Joshua for a defeat against Andy Ruiz, who had a great night? So that's the quote. And indeed, people seem to act as though resume doesn't matter anymore, because Anthony Joshua definitely has the best resume in the heavyweight division as it stands right now. Even more impressive given how few fights he's had, particularly compared to Deontay Wilder. But yet all of this is being dismissed. This goes back to the groupthink again. This hype catches fire, and it's like a bushfire that just burns through the landscape. That's what the Deontay Wilder hype is like at the moment. Not the reality, the hype. And so many people have got caught up in that hype. And you see, the Wilder hype and the Fury hype is predicated on bashing Anthony Joshua and diminishing everything he's done. Because there's only one belt at stake in this Wilder Fury rematch. AJ's got 3 of the belts. He's the only guy who's consolidated. He's got the best resume. So in order to sell this event, Bob Arum, Al Heyman, Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, and many of the journalists surrounding it who are just caught up in the hype, they have to trash AJ in order to legitimize this fight as being for the #1 spot in the division. There's no other way to do it. And that really is what you call conning the fans. Because the only way to settle who the best in the division is to have an undisputed champion. Never have you heard me in my videos tell you that AJ is the best heavyweight in the world. How could I possibly say that? I wouldn't, and I haven't. I've consistently said there is no best heavyweight in the world. Until we have an undisputed champion, then we won't know. These guys have to all fight each other. And so you've got people like me pushing for undisputed. Then you've got the fanboys making all the excuses for why undisputed doesn't even need to happen. They're trying to make out as though AJ's irrelevant and Wilder can go on without undisputed and he's still the best. That's absurd. And that shows you the difference in mentality between a real boxing fan like me and the fanboys who they're not really interested in boxing. They're just interested in jumping on a hype train. So this next quote is quite similar from Steve Kim. This is from the IFL TV interview. And it goes as follows. If you actually look at the resume and the strength of schedule, and we always talk about that. Look, it's hands down to me, Anthony Joshua does have the best heavyweight resume. Now, does that make him a favorite over either guy on Saturday night? Maybe not, for different reasons. But we can't have it both ways as observers and say, well, who you fight and who you beat matters, and then completely discount it with AJ. I find that odd. So that's the quote. Indeed, it is odd. Who you fight and who you beat matters. But with AJ, who has the best resume, well, he's trash. He's garbage. I mean, the idea that you can try and sell Luis Ortiz, 38 years old when he first fought Wilder, 40 or 41 in the rematch, the idea that you can sell him as being better than Vladimir Klitschko is absolute insanity. How on earth is that a better win? Klitschko was reigning for how many years? Ridiculous that you're trying to tell me Ortiz was better than Klitschko or even Povetkin. What on earth has Ortiz done, amateur or pro, to make him better than Povetkin, who only had one loss on his record? But again, this is the situation at the moment in the heavyweight division. Hype and groupthink, the sheep herd mentality has taken over. And there are very few people who are still grounded in the real world with regards to what's really the case in the heavyweight division right now. What's really the case is it's all still to play for. There's all still to play for in the heavyweight division. That's what's really the case. Nothing is settled. Nothing is sewn up. Those who are telling you everything is sewn up are people with an agenda who actually don't want the undisputed fight. If you're a real boxing fan, you want the undisputed fight. You'll stop making excuses for Wilder, stop making excuses for Fury, and you'll be very alarmed when they're saying that we don't need to fight Anthony Joshua. He's irrelevant. When you hear them say stuff like that, if you're a real boxing fan, you'll be very concerned with those kind of comments. Because those are the kind of comments that come from people who are trying to hoodwink you. If you really are the number one, you should be pushing for that undisputed fight. It should be the absolute top of your list. Anyway, those are all the quotes. I urge you to go and check out the interviews in full on Boxing Social, YouTube channel, and also IFL TV. Steve Kim, as I say, veteran ESPN journalist, has given an excellent breakdown on this fight and a very unbiased, impartial take on the current world title picture at heavyweight. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. It's Hatman, I'm out. Hatman merch is now available. We got t-shirts, vests, hoodies, and more. Just click the link below. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.